Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's CIW China Seminar Series. My name is Beverly Lok. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of IR in the Cargill School of Asia Pacific Affairs. I'd like to start by acknowledging and celebrating the first Australians on whose traditional unceded lands that we meet on today, that we learn on, that we gather on, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So very warm welcome. We're delighted to have Dr. Alvin Wong here with us today, speaking on transnationalizing transgender in Sinophone, Hong Kong. Let me just introduce our speaker. Dr. Alvin Wong is assistant professor in the Department of Comparative Literature at the University of Hong Kong. He is also the co-director of the Center for the Study of Globalization and Cultures. His research covers Hong Kong literature and cinema, Sinophone studies, queer theory, and transnational feminism. And his book, I think I saw it somewhere, Unruly Comparison, Queerness, Hong Kong, and the Sinophone, is published by Duke University Press in 2025. Many congratulations on that. And Dr. Wong has also published in journals such as Gender, Place, and Culture, Culture Theory and Critique, Cultural Dynamics, and the list goes on. He has also co-edited the volume Keywords in Queer Sinophone Studies, published by Routledge in 2020, and is also the editor of the journal Continuum. So really delighted to have you here today. Just very quickly on the format, Dr. Wong will speak for about 50 minutes. And that should give us plenty of time for Q&A. We've also got an online audience, so during the Q&A, I'll be moderating between the questions here and also online. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Albert. Thank you.
Thanks, Beverly, for this wonderful introduction. Really generous of you to host this seminar, and because you did the land acknowledgement, I don't have to do it, so thank you so much. And above all, I really want to thank Professor Ari Heinrich, who has been a longtime mentor, supporter, advocate of my work, without whom I don't think I can finish writing the book. So I really, thanks for Ari's sponsorship of my visit. So I'll get right into it because hopefully I don't overrun too much. My talk today, so this is the book cover, and I know this is not a formal book talk, but if you want to buy directly from the publisher, this is the discount code, just in case. My talk today demonstrates that studying queer Sinophone cultures in Hong Kong requires the framework of queer globalities to move beyond the homogenizing tendency of the global gaze, right? So there's always this debate of how do we study non-Western queerness, non-Western sexual cultures, and some proponents have suggested that late capitalism leads to the homogenization of LGBT culture around the world. So the talk is a response to that in some ways. And conceptually, queer globalities illustrates the convergent dynamics of global queer rights discourses, local geopolitics, and so-called pink capitalism within the global modernities of queer Asia. And this concept moves beyond the simplistic binary of the local/global by coming to terms with the many ways of being queer and global at the same time. So a lot of the examples that I will talk about, it shows how we can reclaim globality for queer Hong Kong and probably some other similar regions of the world. I'll explore 3 distinct areas of inquiry, including queer and trans rights, transgender cinema, and an art photo exhibition. And I argue that neoliberal and global Asian sites like Hong Kong offer diverse expressions of queer globalities and Sinophone regionalism that are distinct from any linear trajectory of queer liberalism. So in terms of the debates on queer liberalism, scholars such in queer diaspora studies and queer of color critique situated mostly in Euro-American academic contexts. They have offered important insights into the dangers of queer liberalism, including how institutional inclusion of LGBT subjects into the workplace, military, gay marriage, and so on have reproduced existing racial inequality, transphobia, Islamophobic homonationalism, right? So scholars like Jasper Poar, David N., Lisa Dugan, and so on and so forth have warned us of that tendency. But what this intersectional theory of queer diaspora and queer of color critique based in the US might offer to queer Asian studies and vice versa is often off the radar of academic knowledge production. So for example, you see a very important quotes from David N., Jack Halberstam, and Jose Munoz in their 2005 special issue of social text called What's Queer About Queer Studies Now. And they offer the politics of epistemological humility as an acknowledgement of this uneven academic knowledge productions of queer theory. They write, such a politics must also recognize that much of contemporary queer scholarship emerges from US institutions and is largely written in English, right? So this fact alone indicates a problematic dynamic between US scholars whose work in queer studies is read in numerous places around the world, whereas scholars writing in languages from other political and cultural perspectives read their work, but are not read in turn. My theorization of queer globality and Sinophone regionalism in Hong Kong constitute a humble attempt at overcoming the current imperial divisions in queer theory. So to give you a bit of a more detailed outline of the talk, the first part I will provide a legal analysis of contemporary LGBT and trans rights in Hong Kong. And the next part, I will offer a queer transnational analysis of the film Tracey, produced by Jun Li. It's a Hong Kong art house film that won several awards in Hong Kong and Taiwan. And Tracey narrates the complex gender identity and sexual desire of Dai Hong, who falls in love but also fell apart with his first crush in high school called Zeng. Is another gay boy in his high school, but he later on retrospectively realized he actually desired the high school crush as a woman, right, rather than as a gay man. And he later on marries a woman and begins a family and eventually identifies as a trans woman called Tracey. And this Dai Hong / Tracey transgender and male to female identity as Tracey also does not result in a heteronormative desire for straight men in the film. Tracey would later on experiment with a Singaporean pansexual character called Bon Tan, who is the current husband of his high school friend Zeng, who passed away in the UK. So Bon Tan himself is fighting his own battle to bring back the ash of his dead husband in order to seek legal burial rights in Hong Kong. Overall, the film maps the condition of becoming trans through multiple queer temporalities, various transnational spaces, including the UK, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and also distinct geopolitical LGBT and sexual rights discourses. It is helpful, and I think it is important to think about this film within the larger context because Hong Kong government tends to tackle LGBTQ rights with tokenistic and reactive measures whenever social issues are brought to legal proceeding. So for example, in the last 3 weeks in Hong Kong, the Legislative Council is debating the pros and cons of passing an order from the High Courts that would mandate a 1-year deadline to introduce registration of gay and lesbian partners who enter into gay marriage outside of Hong Kong. So this is, if it happens in a year, it's still a fairly limited kind of right because you need to have the resources to marry outside of Hong Kong in the first place. And whenever some legal cases happen like that, in the Legislative Council, there are a lot of conservative politicians who made a lot of transphobic and homophobic remarks. So that's been happening in Hong Kong. So reckoning with these material limits of queer lives, Tracey visualizes Sinophone Hong Kong as a city of queer globalities, where queerness evinces precisely these uneven experiments of working out trans and queer identities in the relative absence of full legal protections, gay marriage, and queer liberalism. So that's the globalities of it, right? The final section of this talk maps the emergent connection between cinema, activism, and photo exhibition. Another recent Hong Kong film, A Woman is a Woman, 女人就是女人, directed by Maisy Suen, is very different from Tracey, as I'll demonstrate in the latter parts of the talk. It narrates the struggle of a married trans woman, Song Ji-yu, and a feminine high school boy, Chiu Ling Fung. So it's a parallel narrative. The feminine boy is considering undergoing sex reassignment surgery. And in November of 2020, the film producer Mimi Wong, whom I get to know quite well, she successfully launched a series of trans photo exhibition and public workshop inspired by the film. Given the time limit, I'll probably only talk about the film fairly briefly, but I hope to show a trailer of the film. And so let's move to the first part, which I call Righting Wrongs in a Global City on Transgender Rights in Hong Kong. The W versus Registrar of Marriages case in 2013 adjudicated transgender people's right to marriage. I approached the W case as offering critical insights into the global dimensions of queer intimacies. In this case, Hong Kong's status as a post-colonial region without political independence plays a crucial part in legal jurisprudence about gender and sexuality by interpolating LGBT folks as what John Ernie calls the included out, right? So on the surface, these LGBT folks are biopolitical subjects that are supposed to have full legal citizenship, but in the domain of gay marriage, same-sex intimacy, so on and so forth, they could not exercise these fundamental rights. So they are literally included out in terms of rights to privacy, marriage, and equal protection at the workplace. This case marked a milestone for LGBT rights in Hong Kong. The courts of final appeal gave trans individuals the rights to marry according to their self-identified gender rather than their biological sex assigned at birth. But these individuals must have already gone through SRS surgery, so it's very restrictive. The legal battle of Miss W, whose birth name remains confidential, began in 2008 when she hired a lawyer to inquire of the Registrar of Marriages whether she could legally enter into marriage with her boyfriend. The registrar denied her request, and the reason is that Hong Kong at that time, and still as of now, does not recognize same-sex marriage, and W's birth certificate indicated her sex as male, rather than her post-SRS gender as female. After a litigation process that lasts for about 5 years, the Courts of Final Appeal finally overturned the registrar's decision on May 13 of 2013 and affirmed her right to enter into a heterosexual marriage. So in giving this judgment, the case very much based on overturning the British precedent in Corbett versus Corbett in 1971 in which it was a very outdated notion of marriage, right? It defines marriage as it was a case about a British aristocrat who wants to nullify his marriage to a trans woman, April Ashley, because, and the courts upheld his rights for that, because it defined the fact that Ashley cannot reproduce a person who is naturally capable of performing the essential role of a woman, which is heterosexual procreation. But it's a very narrow idea of what defines a woman. In other words, the British courts at that time regarded sexual intercourse leading to procreation as essential to the definition of marriage. But by 2002, there is already an emerging European consensus, particularly in the case of Goodwin versus the UK, in which post-operative MTF, Christine Goodwin, claimed that the existing marriage law violated her rights to marry in terms of Article 8, 12, 13, and 14 of the European Courts of Human Rights. So the 2013 Miss W case very much is based on this rationale in terms of the adjudication of trans rights through the rhetoric of queer liberalism. But at the same time, we must also take into account, to understand this legal victory, we also need to take into account the fact that while it reaffirms the rights to enter into heterosexual marriage for Ms. W, it also signals this kind of snowball effect, if you will. It's a kind of signaling a caveat, a disclaimer that this case has nothing to do with gay marriage, right? In fact, Justice Geoffrey Ma and Robert Ribeiro, who delivered the final ruling in Ms. W case, they stated quite clearly, quote, "We should make it clear that nothing in this judgment is intended to address the question of same-sex marriage." So Ms. W, after SRS surgery, can enter into heterosexual marriage with a man only. And one more interesting concurring opinion by Judge Kamal Bolkeri point out the often overlooked fact that, in fact, in 2004, there was already another MTF from Chengdu, Sichuan, who already is granted a marriage license. So in some way, Hong Kong is not only catching up to the European consensus, but also is catching up to mainland China, whose political system is sometimes seen as far less transparent and liberal than that of Hong Kong. So in analyzing this case, we see how Hong Kong as a fragile post-colonial region has in recent years selectively adopted certain features of queer liberalism in order to play catch up to both the West and China, but its gradual chipping away of legal transparency and political autonomy after 2014 umbrella movement and after 2019 political crisis and protests means that the question of same-sex marriage, as I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, the issues of trans rights, of using a gender-neutral bathroom, all of these are indefinitely put on hold, or at least very hotly debated. Queer globalities in the arena of law, intimacy, and sexuality reveal the fact that Hong Kong sexual minorities must come to terms with and often undertake their activism within these often fraught terrains. And it shows that queer globality also names the critical encounters between local legal and institutional structures in Hong Kong and global claims to queer rights and intimacy. And it captures the messy friction and unpredictable outcomes through which these claims to queer liberalism, rights, and belonging are often unevenly applied and negotiated in the post-colonial regions. So I'll move on to the more, hopefully more fun parts when I get to some of the closer textual analysis of the film. This is the poster, the cover of the film. And I pose two leading questions in reading this film, which is, what does it mean to live a transgender life beyond the predictable outcome of queer liberal trajectory of overcoming oppression and reaching sexual liberation? The film presents a particularly Hong Kong transgender cinematic narrative that offers some clues. Its emphasis on transnational queer spaces and temporalities implicates Hong Kong as a region of queer globality. And Hong Kong is a post-colonial global financial hub. This is often the image that Hong Kong government wants to project to the world as Asia's world city. That's the official name, the governmental kind of lingo. But this is also a place where queer liberalism and substantive rights are unevenly applied, as I just shown in the legal reading. The film opens, so I'll talk through some film still. This is the cast of the film, which you'll understand it as I talk through the film stills. The film opens with a breathtaking panorama of a scenic lake on the left, where three young boys are playing in the water. The scene is narrated by Dai Hong, the protagonist, who is now a successful owner of an optical store in Hong Kong. And from his voiceover, we learn that Dai Hong keeps having the same dream in this bygone past where they're playing in the water, which is already 25 years ago. This opening nostalgic visuality is juxtaposed with the present when he's awakened, Dai Hong is awakened by a phone call in the early morning from a Singaporean man, Bon Tan, who breaks the tragic news that Dai Hong, Bon's lover and husband in the UK, and also Dai Hong's teenage crush, has just passed away in the UK. Bon will be bringing his lover's cremation urn back to Hong Kong for a proper burial. And troubled by her husband Dai Hong's sudden crying, Anne, his wife, knocks on his door and offers to share the bed with him as a comforting gesture. Her husband kindly rejects the offer, which is hinting the fact that they no longer sleep together. And soon after this scene, it's which I think is quite interesting. And maybe she's sexually frustrated. She tells her son Vincent that their Indonesian female domestic worker, Partey, is secretly having sex with a Pakistani man at the infamous Chungking Mansions on the weekend. So if you've been to Hong Kong or if you've heard of this place, it's pretty much everything, whatever happens in Chungking Mansion stays in Chungking Mansion. Like you can get currency exchange. It's like a love motel, and people sell drugs and sometimes a lot of counterfeit products. Anne is basically disciplining her domestic worker by saying that she found a bed of condoms in her drawer, but responding to her mom disciplining or surveillance of racialized sexuality in the household. Vincent, the son, claims that it is actually natural for every human being to have erotic desire. So this opening sequence, it's very intricate because it interweaves dense layers of temporality, including the past and present, geography in terms of the UK, Hong Kong, Singapore, Indonesia, the domestic worker, and Pakistan. And also in terms of spaces, right? The domestic home versus the supposedly perverse spaces outside of it. This opening sequence captures powerfully the visuality of queer globalities, wherein Hong Kong emerges as a global city for queer desire, not because it fully embraces queer liberalism, like some people would think in the US, Australia, and other sites of queer liberalism, But precisely because different kinds of sexuality, desire, memories, and bodies are slowly coming into view, Hong Kong marks a uniquely Sinophone region of queerness. These queer bodies and desire, whether they are local, transnational, interracial, or migratory, are also highly relational and mediated through incommensurable geographies and what I call in my book, the aesthetics of unruly comparison. Basically, it's making a case of Hong Kong itself as already a place for doing global comparison, right? You don't need to turn to East-West comparison in order to do that work. There's already incommensurable differences in terms of race, gender, sexuality, class in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong provide us with a case for doing cross-cultural and global comparison through its queer Sinophone cultures. So there are many ways to read queerness in the scene that I talked through just now, right? Her husband queerness results from his refusal to perform heteronormative sexual pleasure with N, but her domestic workers' party is equally queer. Even though she's so-called heterosexual, her queerness is expressed through her refusal to be disciplined as a chaste, sexless, and domestically behaving racialized worker for the middle-class family. So by linking these seemingly incommensurable spaces within and outside of Hong Kong, the film visual opening indexes what Howard, my friend, and collaborator Howard Chang and I have elsewhere termed queer liberalism, which we define as signaling greater attention to less orderly, bilateral, and horizontal intra-regional traffics of queerness across different countries and regions in Asia. One other aspect of the film that I want to highlight is that it also shows a disjointed temporality. So for a lot of gay and lesbian film, even if we're not talking about queer Hong Kong cinema, it tends to kind of map a linear narrative of coming out, right? Sort of leaving one's family and exercising one's LGBT rights with the development of gay capitalism. So that's the kind of conventional understanding, be out and now and proud. But for this film, there is another queer minor trans character that is presented as somebody who awakens Dai Hong's trans identity, right? So I find this to be quite a critique of that kind of linear model of trans identity. This is happening at the moment when Dai Hong picked up his past crush husband at the airport and decided that it is his responsibility as a close friend of his friend who passed away to help Bond to seek the legal rights to burial. And he recruited the helps of his son-in-law Jeffrey, and this conversation about helping Bond Tan to seek rights to legal burial as a spouse of the gay husband happens in the OT house. So I'll just play the clip and you'll see what happened there. So this is Anne, Dai Hong's wife. So it should be 20. Let me just go back to that.
我哋係咪有必要將件事要搞到咁大嘅？
嗱，一係咁，我聽日同你朋友見咗面先，然後先再決定下一步點行，好冇？
你最近同阿 Baby 有啲拗撬？
佢而家有咗 BB，情緒係冇咁穩定噶啦。
都係嘅，加埋煲兒件事咧，佢哋兩姐弟好錫煲兒。
煲兒做咩？
And that was Dai Hong talking to his son-in-law, who's a lawyer.
Hello， 出邊坐啊！咁得閒嘅？
係啊，我今日接機嚟嘅，個朋友唔使我陪佢食飯，咁咪得閒咯。
喺半世紀之前已經喺廣州享負盛名，有小紅線女之稱。
不如咧？
誒係喎，睇下到邊先。
有請花艷紅先生。
才聽臉色，我敢懷心誓，不覺暗痴妻。
So they're kind of looking back to their past and when they used to work in the dim sum establishment. And I'll show one more thing when they went to the apartment of Brother Dowling's, and then they put on makeup and went to Lam Kwai Fong, which is the kind of expat area in Hong Kong. Where Lam Kwai Fong is a gay expat pastoral. So I think you kind of get the idea. So what I'm intrigued by in this in the first clip is that the traditional Cantonese tea house turns out to be a space, a microcosm of queer globality, what I've been calling queer globality. The film purposefully inserts the discussion of LGBT rights and legal redress into the relatively traditional space of opera singing and the leisure of the gentry class. In this way, the film powerfully destabilizes the needs dichotomy of tradition versus modernity and the public versus the private. That is, what is considered to be a controversial and public legal issue has infiltrated into the space of an old tea house. And here we can listen to the feminine and queer voice of Brother Dowling, which is a source of inspiration for Dai Hong in his awakening to become Tracey. And this scene points to the messy, disjointed, and intersecting sources of globality and modernity. So queer globality here is constituted simultaneously by cultural elements that seems to be traditional in terms of Hong Kong, and also the relatively emerging modern issues of LGBT rights. And in framing Brother Dowling as a queer pioneer of trans identity formation for Daihong. The film refuses to succumb to a teleological narrative that assumes transgender subjects only emerge through the global flow of transgender rights movement from Euro-America around 1990s, right? So the film itself provides another genealogy to map Sinophone transgender history. All right, so I'll quickly jump to the next session. I think we kind of have some good idea about what Tracey is about. So if Tracey tells the trans narrative of Daihong becoming Tracey through a cinematic aesthetic of queer globalities, the film A Woman is a Woman, directed by Maisy Suen, at first seems unmistakably local by comparison. It narrates a double transgender narrative by pairing the struggle of a married trans woman, Song Ziyu, with a frustrated feminine high school boy, Chiu Ling Fung, who is considering SRS in the near future. More than simply an exemplar of local art house film, it opens up multiple views of the local and the regional, that is Hong Kong, while queering essentialist understandings of trans bodies in general. And it also signals kind of locally inflected notions of what I call a queer regional imaginary. And queer Sinophone regionalism imagines, here I'm building on the work of Gayatri Gopinath in her book Unruly Visions, and she defines queer regionalism as suggesting the possibility of tracing lines of connections and commonality, a self-self relationality between seemingly discrete regional spaces that in fact bypass the nation. And I also draw on another lesbian Hong Kong scholar, Denise Tan's work. She's been doing, although I don't think she often uses the term Sinophone, but she's actually been doing very interesting Sinophone comparison of aging lesbian women and the kind of obstacles that they must overcome. Oftentimes these obstacles are very spatial, which I see as resonating with the film A Woman is a Woman. So in Denise's work, she wrote an important essay called Everyday Erotics in Urban Density. And she interviews, does ethnography and interviews aging lesbian women across Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan. And she writes, I call this mode of spatial practice as everyday erotics in density to describe the ways of navigating sexual desires in relation to urban development and colonial modernity, where becoming a woman with lesbian design means not only carving out one's alternative erotic space, but also disengaging with traditional gender roles in one's life course and redefining gender and sexuality for an older generation of women. So we see that happening a lot in the film. And to make that a bit clear, I will play the trailer from the YouTube clips. Thanks, Melody, again.
我出世嗰陣，的確係個男仔嚟嘅。
老婆，嚟完未啊？
我成日都覺得我生錯咗個身體。
我唔係變態啊！我會做翻女仔㗎。
媽咪，你有冇拍過拖啊？你唔想掂到我咩？
喂，你個班長，
我只係得你一個男仔啊，冇三個女人啊！
你想試下？
我晚晚屌緊嗰個都係男人啊！
我一路都係一個女人嚟㗎。
你以為你做咗個變性手術，你真係變咗個女人啊？
唔通喺個出世紙上邊寫我係男人定女人係咁重要咩？
So you kind of get the idea of what this parallel trans. It's a very trans woman film, and some critics have sort of critiqued the film as reinforcing an essentialist trans woman narrative, which one can say is true, but I like to unpack the more complex aspect of the film, which is that it does encounter. It shows how, for example, Song Ziyu has to deal with her husband, who's very transphobic, after he found out that she has been hiding her true identity in the past, which is a biological man, and that and he never forgive her, even by the end of the film. Versus Chiu Ling Fung, in the film, you see the feminine boy walking across the hallway in the high school, which turns out to be my alma mater, actually. The first time I was watching the film, it was so accidental, this kind of resonates with my childhood of thinking about, where I grew up and, and dealing with, my own kind of queerness when I was growing up. So this film indexes all of these dense spatial practices, both constraining, but in the process also opening up some possibilities. So I won't say much in terms of the narrative, because you probably understand most of it at this point. We see her, we see Chiu Ling Fung, the feminine boy, countering the strictures and violence of everyday erotics in urban density. It offers a parallel view of Chiu Ling Fung as she breaks the school gender uniform code by wearing a dress on a casual wear day and confronts a school principal, asserts her decision to undergo SRS in the future, and rebels against her parents, who insist that she pray every night at the dinner table. But by the end of the film, she was able to convince the principal to provide a gender-neutral bathroom with the help of a more understanding social worker at school. I didn't have that as growing up and attending. The school is called Mingshen Shuyuan, right? Which of course echoes the Mingshen Zhuyi by some extent. I think there might be some KMT connection in that high school. But I do, now that I think about it, I remember one of my high school teacher, maybe she knew I was queer. She sort of told me her favorite idol when she was a teenage girl was Boy George, right? I thought that was so interesting that she told me that. Anyway, so this is how Chiu Ling Fung confronts and renegotiates these spatial practices. What I'm also really intrigued by is the way in which the film inspires transmedial connections, right? In terms of, especially after 2019, the social protests, the protests and the social movement, which encounter COVID, which of course is a period of kind of frustration for many, but also a period of kind of doomfulness, if you will. But Mimi Wong, even during a pandemic, she announced that she would enhance the visibility of the film by launching a related project called Transcendence, which was held in November 21st to 30th, in which that features trans individuals who share their own life experiences. It also includes a public screening of the film and also Q&A. So I think of this, of course, as a kind of photo exhibition, but it's also a kind of public advocacy that the government doesn't really do, right? So you see folks such as Mimi Wong, who identify as a trans woman, but also serving as a kind of activist, is doing the kind of work that doesn't quite exist yet as a form of public knowledge. Given my experience of watching the film, I also share the events with my students in my queer theory course at HKU. I attended the Human Library, and I want to share my experience of attending the Human Libraries. I think I would conclude with some of this sharing. So so Human Library is I think it's a Swedish concept of sharing life experience of people who are different from the audience. And in this case, it's featuring two trans women, young girl. Alice first shared her experience of overcoming social discrimination at her workplace. She has a stable income as an engineer, but she was traumatized by the fact that her workplace does not provide her with a gender-neutral bathroom. She was denied a salary raise without any reason. And the fact that Hong Kong does not have anti-discrimination law on the book that would protect on the basis of gender expression and identity means that some transphobic employers can indeed fire employees without giving a very clear reason. Pinky is another individual who shared a story, and as she was sharing her story, actually another South Asian man entered into this COVID, and everybody was sitting in a circle, kind of like quite similar to the number here at the talk today. And so we all form a circle, but maintain some kind of social distancing. And Mimi Wong turned to me because they were doing their sharing in Cantonese, and Mimi recognized me as someone who's teaching at HKU. So she turned to me to translate the conversation into English for the South Asian man. And so I try my best to translate most of the life stories by Pinky. And Pinky likes to wear pink dress in a Lolita fashion. Her trans self-fashioning is very lighthearted, and it lightened up the atmosphere in the room. She actually studied abroad in Australia and returned to Hong Kong after college. When she worked at a McDonald's, her boss also prohibited her from using the bathroom by locking up the bathroom. So these are some of the experience that they include in the sharing. I want to conclude my talk today by suggesting that the photo exhibition, Transcendence, the Human Library events highlight the Sinophone politics of incommensurability that is key to my book and also to my work in general. Sinophone theorist Shi has written extensively on feminism, transnational encounters, and the politics of incommensurability. In her much-cited essay towards an ethics of transnational encounter, or when does a Chinese woman become a feminist, she points out how the academic compartmentalization of knowledge often separates different positions of Chinese women and feminists. And through a provocative exposition of multiple paradigms of feminism, transnationalism, and affect, she arrives at the logic of transpositional and transvaluational relationality, in that we must vigorously question the position of the self and the other. Drawing on her work on transnational feminism and the politics of incommensurability, my own invocation of transnationalizing transgender must also be seen as an incomplete translation, marked by gaps, tension, desire, and silence. Mimi Wong, Alice, Pinky, the film, Tracey, and The Woman is a Woman cannot, and they do not fully translate what the category of trans can signify in Hong Kong, more than I could translate fully the testimonies of Alice and Pinky to the South Asian man that was sitting next to me. It is not an accident that Mimi Wong picked me to translate the message, given my own privileged background as an English-speaking academic in Hong Kong. So in recognizing, so sort of reflecting on my own participation in this workshop, I realized that perhaps recognizing this ethics of incommensurability in Sinophone Hong Kong might be the first step towards imagining some forms of queer and trans solidarity. So these are the photos. So even after the initial photo exhibition, it went on to Hong Kong U. My colleague Brenda Allegre, who is a trans Filipino, academic and dear colleague of mine, she organized the event and teamed up with Mimi. So in each of the photo, there is a placard that includes some sharing of each individual. And this is Mimi Wong, who's she's just so fabulous, and but even when she's thinking, this photo is quite interesting in the sense that you don't know what she's thinking, right? So it's a fabulous pose, but also one that denies a full translation of what does it mean to be trans in Hong Kong. So my talk shows the messy process of representing trans personhood in Hong Kong, and I illustrate how transness as a form of unruly embodiment indexes its own incommensurability and untranslatability within Hong Kong. And it shows how Hong Kong itself is a queer unruly region for signifying transness differently. So I'll conclude here and really happy to engage in Q&A and talk more.